No one should have to choose between their own safety and their pets. But nearly half of domestic abuse survivors delay leaving because they can't bring their pets with them. Purina is helping to create more pet-friendly domestic violence shelters through the Purple Leash Project, so survivors and their pets can escape and heal together. Visit Purina.com/purple to learn more.
Hey there, Duke fans. Welcome to DBR Bites, episode number 121. Donald Wine here. Jason Evans also with me. Jason, how was your Sunday? It's Sunday morning. It's very early. How was your Saturday? It was very loaded with college sports for me.
Yeah, exactly. Same with me. I was watching a pretty fair bit of college football. It was a typical Saturday. Nice weather. Just enjoying the weather before it gets really, really cold and ugly.
Yeah, I got my double dip in. I went to the U.S. men's game. I went to the Villanova game. I got to see some of the football game. We'll talk about football after the break. But Jason, what we're here for is the big game that's coming up on Tuesday night at Madison Square Garden against the Kansas Jayhawks. It is the Champions Classic. We're back at that time of year. We love this tournament that we do every single year. I'm sorry, I should say this classic that we do every single year. And let's get into the preview for the Kansas Jayhawks because this is another big test for these Duke Blue Devils. I will start by saying they are 3-1 on the season. They have wins over Green Bay, Texas A&M Corpus Christi, and just on Saturday against Princeton. Their only loss coming at UNC. 87-74 in a game that Jason, I think we briefly talked about on this show.
We did.
With Caleb Wilson and how he kind of went off and helped the Tar Heels defeat the Jayhawks.
Yeah, and the thing that was notable about that game, I think, was that Kansas had a lead early. Kansas looked, pretty good, and then Carolina just stormed back on them and really took them to the woodshed in the second half. But Donald, as we're about to get into that Kansas team and the Kansas team Duke's about to play, 1 week later or so, very, very different because of a key missing piece.
Yeah, I mean, look, because of that loss, they're still 25th in the Associated Press poll. They're 24th in the coaches, 27th in KenPom. Bart Torvik and Evan Mia have them rated a little bit higher. They have them in the 17 to 19 range. But Jason, as you get into the metrics, the first thing that pops off at me when you look at this team so far, I mean, it's early in the season, is that the defense is well ahead of the offense. And I'm sure you'll talk about some important players who may or may not be in the Garden on Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly. I'll do the metrics, but I'm going to start with the players because
there's a player we need to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. We all thought when this was announced that this was going to be Cam Boozer versus Darryn Peterson, two of the top three players in the class. Even though Peterson really plays wing, Cam Boozer, is more of a power post forward for Duke. But Darryn Peterson is a truly elite athlete, tremendous touch, great finishing skills, a guy who just has so much in his offensive bag and is also an elite defender as well. On the season, he was hitting 50% of his threes. I mean, Donald, think about this, as good as Cam Boozer is, as much as we've been impressed with Cam Boozer, the consensus at the moment is that Darryn Peterson goes ahead of Cam Boozer in the NBA draft.
Yeah.
A special player is Darryn Peterson, but it looks like Duke is not going to face him. He's endured a season of injury so far, little stuff. He missed a game because he was sick. But then he played in one game and he said his hamstring got tight. And now Bill Self says he's going to be out for the, quote, immediate future with that right hamstring injury. They're saying it's day-to-day, but it certainly sounds like Darryn Peterson will not be available for the game against Duke. And that changes Kansas so much, not having a guy like that who was widely expected to be an All-American and just the focal point of everything you're doing on offense, his creativity, his ability to get his own shot, his ability to finish his shot, the impact he has on your rebounding and defense with his athleticism and his ability to jump. It's hard to judge this Kansas team now because they don't have this huge missing piece.
It will be noted that Bill Self, he said this out for the immediate future thing, but someone said, okay, your next game is against Duke. Is he playing? Is he out against Duke? And he refused to rule out Darryn Peterson, which is smart because why would you rule somebody out of that nature? And again, Duke has to prepare for a game with Darryn Peterson and a game without Darryn Peterson, no matter how injured he may be. But the idea is that this is not Bill Belichick labeling Tom Brady as questionable for 15 years on the scouting report. He truly, I don't think anyone knows. It might be one of those, he does the walkthrough an hour before tip off to see if his hamstring's ready to go. And if it's tight, they'll hold him out. But you still have to prepare for a guy like that because you don't want to be shocked if he does pull a Willis Reed and end up on the floor.
And he wants to play in this game. He wants to showcase
Yep.
himself, opposite Cam Boozer, again, regardless of whether they're covering each other. The matchup would happen, and the college basketball and pro basketball world would definitely be paying attention to that. That said, I really think, look, a hamstring injury means that it's going to be tough for him to be in game shape. Even if it's only been 1 week, this guy just hasn't been. He hasn't been running. He hasn't been doing much of anything with a hamstring injury. That's just the nature of those kind of leg injuries. So
explosiveness too is gonna be missing quite a bit.
And if you're Kansas, look, I don't want to say this game doesn't matter, but in the grand scheme of things, this game doesn't matter. I don't know why you would risk perhaps losing him for a longer period of time. And hamstring is one of those things that, you just got to give it rest. You got to let it fix itself. And if you test it, you could make it worse. So yep. I think there's just very little chance we're going to see him.
I have full experience with that, Jason. In high school, I pulled both of my hamstrings at the same time. Let me tell you. Rest feels like the dumbest thing possible. It still hurts when you rest, but it's definitely something where your explosiveness is not there, and it takes a while for it to get back to 100% because the body's fickle sometimes, and sometimes the body's like, oh, you're 99% of the way there, and then you take one wrong step, and you're back to zero.
So let me give you a preview of Kansas, and I'm going to assume that Darryn Peterson will not be playing. And if Darryn Peterson does play, well, go back and don't listen to any of this. Without Darryn Peterson, the offensive burden for Kansas really shifts to Flory Badunga, who's a kid that, Duke fans, we've talked about this guy before on this podcast. Yep. Flory, Duke was very involved in recruiting Flory Badunga, and Kansas got him at the last minute. And really, it was a Duke versus Kansas battle for the most part for this kid. He is a big 6'10", 235, and even saying he's 6'10", 235 doesn't describe his size. This is a dude in the post. By the way, I want to point out for Duke fans, the fact that we missed on Flory Badunga kind of opened the door for Duke to get Common Malawach. So it kind of worked out pretty nicely for the Blue Devils. Mm-hmm. No offense to Flory, but I'll take Common any day of the week. So the thing to know about Flory Badunga is he's a heck of an athlete. He is a heck of a load in the post. He's not yet a polished offensive player. Still, he has this ability. He'll do a drop step and get a dunk, or he'll grab a rebound and get a dunk, or he'll catch a lob and get a dunk. That's a lot of what he does. And he's pretty elite at that get a dunk, get a layup, get something right around the rim kind of stuff. And he's so big that it's hard to move him off of his spot. They played Princeton on Saturday. You mentioned this, Donald. He had 5 dunks in that game. He took 9 shots at the rim. He made every single one of them. On the season, Flory Badunga is hitting a ridiculous 76% of his field goals. And that's
a big number.
That's a big number. He's not going to go outside and take any threes. He's not going to shoot outside of 7 feet, probably. I'll be surprised if if you leave him wide open on the baseline, maybe, I don't know, maybe he takes a little something, but Flory Badunga mostly is operating right there in the post. He is a major presence on the boards. He's a rim protector. when he's in the game, he blocks 11% of the shots that are taken when he's in the game. It's a big old number. 11% block shot rate. When you consider that there are shots that are taken that are not in his range.
Right.
So, yeah. So if you go inside on him, one of the really interesting things that's going to happen in this game is Pat Gongba and Cameron Boozer, when they try and take the Kansas guys down into the post, which Duke is really, really good at. That's a huge part of our attack. Kansas is going to have Flory Badunga back there to send those shots the other direction. Flory's had 3 or more blocks in 3 of Kansas's three out of the 4 games this year. He's averaging 17 points per game, almost 8 rebounds per game. This will be Patrick Gongba's biggest test of the season, and a really important game in that regard. And we should note, when Pat Gongba's not in and Malik Brown is in, really interesting matchup, because I don't think Malik Brown is a great matchup with Flory Badunga. Flory's playing such a power game that I think it, sort of limits some of the things that Malik Brown usually does. And I kind of wonder if maybe when Malik is in the game, we may see Cam Boozer playing Flory a little bit more and Malik switching to a different kind of player, because Malik's such a varied defensive player and Flory Badunga is such a one-dimensional offensive player.
Well, if you remember last year in Vegas when we played Kansas, we got to see, he wasn't quite in shape. I think he had some nagging injuries that helped him, or that hindered him during the preseason. But we got to saw Badunga last year, and there were times where we had to put Malik Brown on him, and I thought for the most part Malik did very well in making, again, the deflections or just otherwise being the stirring the hornet's nest whenever Badunga got the ball. Now, was he perfect in keeping him clean and keeping him off the boards? No. That's probably where there's going to be a bit of a downfall when he comes in, because again, we're not asking Malik to get 10, 15 rebounds, though he is capable of doing so. I think that's going to be interesting, those rotations, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get to some other guys on Kansas. So their last game against Princeton, which obviously was a game without Darryn Peterson, they did something kind of crazy. They had been starting Elmarco Jackson on the wing. They took him out of the starting lineup, and instead they started a 6'11", 240-pound freshman named Bryson Tiller. They basically started Tiller at power forward. So they took out one of their smaller wings, and they went with a huge 6'11" freshman. Bryson Tiller is, a 5-star kind of guy. He's a very, very good player. By the way, they took Elmarco Jackson out because he's really struggled so far this year in a bigger role for Kansas than he had a year ago. But it means that the Kansas starting lineup against Princeton, Donald, this was a big team. They went 6'4", 6'6", 6'7", 6'10", 6'11". That's a big old lineup. That's Duke size.
That's a Duke lineup.
Yeah, exactly. That is Duke size. And it's interesting because Bryson Tiller, the guy who's playing power forward for them, despite his huge size, he's very comfortable playing on the perimeter and shooting threes. In fact, like half the shots he's taken this season have been from 3, and he's hitting 63. Get the number, Donald. 63% from 3-point range. Low sample size. Early in the season, I get all this stuff. That's not going to be sustainable. But the bottom line is you cannot leave this dude alone outside. Let's get to the guards and wings. The point guard, Donald, you talk about the head of the snake, is Melvin Council Jr. He played at Wagner and then St. Bonaventure. He's now in the big time at Kansas. He's one of these, big time transfers. Kansas does this every year. Kansas is one of the best teams at getting big time players out of the portal. Melvin Council is one of those. Melvin Council is not really an outside shooter. On the season, he is 0 for 9 from 3. Donald, do you know what percentage 0 for 9 is?
0.
Yes. That is correct, sir.
I'm a mathematician.
Very good. But that's not just small sample size. Last year, he hit just 29%. And the season before that, he hit just 26% of his threes. This is not a guy he'll take a couple 3-pointers, but he's not going to make many of them. His primary job is ball distribution, Melvin Council. He's averaging better than 5 assists per game, has an assist to turnover ratio of like 4-1, which is really good for a point guard. So far, he's only scoring about 7 points per game for Kansas, but he's capable of more. He was like a 14-point per game scorer at both Wagner and St. Bonaventure. So that's the head of the snake. The guy that they have on the wing, they've got a couple guys. One of them is Trey White. He's in his 4th school in 4 years. Trey White played at USC, Louisville and Illinois. He is a gun for hire. He's another guy who's not really a great outside shooter, just barely 30% from three in his career. Really good at drawing fouls, though, getting to the free throw line. He's great at getting to the rim. He's the kind of guy who does a lot of backdoor cuts on you and uses his strength to muscle you out of the way in the paint. That's what, Trey White is. He's averaging better than 12 points per game for Kansas and hitting around 60% of his 2-point field goals. The interesting thing about White, it should be notable, this was a guy who, coming out of high school, was going to go to Kansas. He actually committed to Kansas and then changed his mind at the last minute and went to USC. I guess he was fated to eventually find his way to Kansas. And then the last guy I want to talk about is, in some ways, kind of the most interesting player. And this, if you're someone who's a big recruiting person for Duke, if you really pay attention to Duke recruiting, then this is another name you know. This is a wing for them, Cole Rosario. He's just a freshman. He's averaging around 9 points per game, hitting about 37% of his threes. Duke was really interested in this kid. He reclassified over the summer, like back in May or June. So rosters were, Duke's roster was kind of full. Everybody's roster was kind of done. And then Cole Rosario was like, I think I'm going to go from the junior class to the senior class. I'm ready to take the leap to go to college. And Duke was one of the teams that really was looking at him. He ended up picking Kansas, and he has moved his way all the way into their starting lineup. He's 6'5", has a 6'9" wingspan. Dude can jump. Dude can, he is elite run jump athlete. He can jump out of the gym. If you watch his AAU highlights and the such, just jaw dropping, the kind of dunks where he looks like he's looking down at the rim kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Really interesting. I think that Cole Rosario is playing a big role for Kansas. Admittedly, he's not like the focus of their offense. He's a low usage player, but the fact that he's starting and playing heavy minutes for them is a very interesting development. And I think this is a guy the NBA is going to be very interested in at some point.
I think when it comes to these players too, the level of how they play is a step up from what we've seen so far. Even if you go back to Tennessee game in the preseason, it was kind of back and forth as to whether Tennessee was rated higher. Some people had Kansas close to the top 10, if not in the top 10 in the preseason. So I'm looking at this team and I'm looking at the talent level and I'm thinking, okay, we've played some good teams so far. Now it's time to, we talk about leveling up. This is the start of that level up period because we're going to have Kansas. We're going to have a couple of bigger games after that. But this is the first step of that because the Champions Classic is something that it's kind of our baby, right? We were born in this. We helped create it. It's been around for so long that it's part of the lexicon and the culture that is Duke. And it's at the Garden. It's at our second home. This should be a game that everyone understands that we're under the brightest lights. And this is a court that a lot of guys will want to play on next year in different colors, right? In the NBA. This is the pinnacle. And so now it's about seeing these guys and respecting the fact that Kansas is, despite their early struggles, is bringing a really good team and we need to be ready for them.
Yeah, I got to think about the advanced metrics I want to get to in 1 second, but just regarding the Champions Classic really quickly, I wanted to note that all-time records in the Champions Classic. So Michigan State's the worst team in the Classic. They're just 5-9 all-time. Kentucky's just 6-8. Duke is 8-6, and Kansas is 9-5. So this game allows Duke to take, or at least tie Kansas for the all-time best record in the Champions Classic. And it's worth noting that Duke is just 1-3 against Kansas. Like we do pretty well against Kentucky and Michigan State. We've not done well against Kansas in the Champions Classic, Donald.
I've been to the one win a few years ago. I believe it was at the Garden. So, let's do it again.
Exactly. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. Let me tell you really quick about some of the advanced metrics for Kansas. And I should note that I think it's tough to look at what they've done so far and really understand how they will play or how good they will be when they don't have Darryn Peterson for this game. It changes everything for them. But still, let's just go ahead and say it. They're like you said, they're a better defensive team than offensive team, especially minus Darryn Peterson, who's such a big part of their offensive attack. Ken Pomeroy has them as the number 11 defensive team and the number 55 offensive team. So you're talking about playing, an elite defense, but a team that's still figuring it out very much on offense. On D, it is the shot blocking and defensive rebounding that are the things that are really impressive. This is probably the toughest front line that Duke will face thus far in the season for sure. There's Kansas is 7th in the country at block shots. I mentioned, how much Flory Badunga gets block shots, but they've got other guys in that front line who are going to be able to do that. So there's 7th in the country at block shots, 30th, top 30 in defensive rebounding. There's not a lot that stands out on the offense. They shoot a few more three-pointers than the average team. They're making them, at a decent percentage, but not an outrageous percentage. Again, part of that is Darryn Peterson, who's been hitting 50% of his threes. Really good team shooting from 2. Their 2-point field goal is really good. Although, interestingly, one thing I want to note about them, and this is not an advanced metric thing, but, I mentioned Cole Rosario is a freshman. I mentioned they've got another freshman. They just moved into the starting lineup. Flory Badunga is just a sophomore. But the rest of the guys who play, and they're not very deep, they're probably going to play 7 guys against Duke. Not surprising, by the way. You lose a guy like Darryn Peterson, your depth goes from like playing 8 guys to playing 7 guys. But the rest of those guys are mostly seniors, really experienced players. So it's a mix of the young and the old, but it's not a Kansas team that is full of older guys, which is what they've had the past few years as they've again loaded up on transfers for the most part, to complement the homegrown guys that they had.
So I want to get into some of the things to watch, and I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, which is the big men matchup. I think that's going to be key for this game, with potentially Darryn Peterson out, and like you said, it's likely that he will either be out or be severely limited. The big men matchup is going to be one to watch between Flory Badunga, and then also on our side, when you have the rotation of Cam Boozer, Pat Gongba, and Malik Brown. And I'm looking at that rebounding is going to be key. We were hammered on the boards early against Kansas last year, and that's kind of what helped them get out to a very early lead that we weren't able to really overcome. We got, super, super close, but we really would have wished we had that 4 minutes back at the beginning of the game, because it was 13-2 very, very quickly. And a lot of that had to do with we just weren't playing with the intensity that is necessary. But the big men, that matchup is going to be key. Playing with intensity is also going to be key. Like I said, this is the Champions Classic. This is a big deal. This is the game that everyone's going to be watching. It's the late one too, right? It's the 9 o'clock game, 9:30 game. Yeah. So this is the game that everyone's going to be tuned in to watch, at least until the East Coast starts to, fall away or tuck away in bed. But this is the game that you want to come out and say, okay, this Duke team has been retooling. They've kind of climbed up in the rankings over the first couple of weeks of the season. Let's see what this team is about. Let's see if it's just more than Cam Boozer. I think also, Jason, one thing that's interesting about this team so far is that in the preseason, we said that the defense was going to be well ahead of the offense to start the season. According to the metrics, that has not proven to be the case. The offense has been quite equal. But this is the game where I think the defense needs to lead the offense, because if we're able to shut down Kansas on offense, I think we will have a lot of transition points that they won't be able to match. Those transition points are how we get very high. I mean, we've had some really high possession numbers in these first few games. It's because we're getting on transition, taking quick shots. We should make them. But I think that we need to get out, and I think if we're able to run, Kansas won't be able to keep up with us for the entire game. That is going to be something to watch. The final thing, shot selection. Last year against Kansas, I was in Vegas for that. Early on, the shot selection was very, very poor, and that's what led Kansas to that start. Shot selection is going to be key. And also, I think is going to be crucial to avoid the slow start that we've been having so far this year. If we take good shots, get our guys active, even if you're missing them, I'm happy with that. And I think, going early to Cam Boozer is going to be one thing, but if a couple threes start falling, it makes Kansas have to reposition their defense immediately, because they're going to want to try and snuff that out. That's going to open up a lot of doors for other guys to take charge. And I think shot selection is going to be key. Yes, go in transition. Yes, take those open threes. But if not, pull it back out, see if there's another option somewhere else. And again, use the clock to your advantage, because I think this Duke team can beat Kansas. I think we're better than Kansas, but we have to play with the intensity that's necessary, and we have to play smart. Kansas is a good enough team that they will take advantage of mistakes.
Yeah, the advanced metric folks, the folks who do projections with computers and such, say that Duke wins this game by about 4 or 5 points. Donald, I think it's worth noting. You were talking about Duke's offense versus Duke's defense. If you take out the preseason expectations, on Bart Torvik, you can remove the preseason expectations. Just go based on results. Let's just go based on the 4 games that Duke has played so far this year. Torvik says we have the 7th best defense in the country and the 43rd best offense. So the defense is, at least in terms of how we played so far, really, really way up there. And the other thing to note about all that is I really wonder, what does Kansas do to score to keep up with Duke? Because I think, I mentioned that Flory Badunga takes a bigger offensive role for them without Darryn Peterson. But Badunga just isn't a guy who's able to create his own kind of shot. You're not running your offense through him. He's not someone, he's not someone who's going to pass the ball or things like that. And if you look at it, Duke's holding teams, Duke's opponents are hitting less than 25% of their 3-pointers. They're hitting less than 40% of their 2-point field goals. Duke's effective field goal percentage defense, you combine threes, you get a bonus for threes. Duke's effective field goal percentage defense is 38%. That's the 3rd best in the country. Duke has been absolutely elite so far at preventing teams from getting good shots and hitting field goals. That's just the profile of this club. And a Kansas team that I just look up and down their lineup and I'm like, where are they getting creation from? And I'm just not really saying, I guess it's Trey White. Melvin Council certainly will try to do stuff, but man, it's going to be without having a Darryn Peterson kind of player that draws the attention of the defense. It puts more pressure on Council and White. And I just think Kansas is Donald. I'm looking at this game. Does Kansas get to 70 points? I really think Kansas doesn't get to 70 points. They struggled to get to 70 against Princeton. The game they played against Princeton just the other day, it's worth noting. This was a 1-point game, midway through the second half, and then Kansas ran away, and Kansas ends up winning by, mid to upper teens, which is, you would expect a team like Kansas to beat Princeton by 20 plus. But it was a competitive game, and I really think if Duke's offense is clicking at all, if we're hitting our threes at all, Kansas just is not going to be able to keep up.
Well, it's funny. The first 4 games this year, Duke has allowed 60, 54, 59, and 62 points. But here's the thing about the Champions Classic: it is a time for people to break out. I hope the answer of who's gonna score in Kansas. I hope we do not find that answer out on Tuesday night, because it means somebody broke out of the mold beyond the Darryn Peterson and said, I can control this team while he's out. I don't want to know the answer to that. I hope it's a very, a game, Jason, where we're, like you said, they're struggling to get into the 60s and we're hitting our shots. It'd be a great night to make a statement that, yes, this team can be for real, and that this murderer's row schedule that John Shire set up, we may be taking some hits, but we're also going to be doing some hitting. And I want to see us take, absorb whatever impact that Kansas brings us on Tuesday and lower the boom on them and see if we can walk out of there once again, leveling that record against Kansas. Let's take a quick break. On the other side, we will discuss what happened on the gridiron on Saturday. Duke, unfortunately, out of the ACC championship race.
Introducing Oakley Meta Vanguard, the new performance AI glasses designed for athletes. With hands-free capture on an action-ready ultra-wide camera, powerful open-ear speakers, and built-in Meta AI that syncs with your Garmin devices for real-time insights while you train. Take your performance to the next level with Oakley Meta Vanguard. Athletic intelligence is here. Learn more on meta.com.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Hi, I'm here to pick up my son Milo.
There's no Milo here.
Who picked up my son from school?
Streaming only on Peacock.
I'm gonna need the name of everyone that could have a connection.
You don't understand. It was just the 5 of us.
So this was all planned.
What are you gonna do? I will do whatever it takes to get my son back.
I honestly didn't see this coming. These nice people killing each other.
All Her Fault. A new series streaming now only on Peacock.
The Who's down in Who Newville were making their list, but some didn't know Walmart has the best brands for their gifts.
What about toys? Do they have brands kids have been wanting all year?
Yep, Barbie, Tony's, and Lego. Gifts that will make them all cheer.
Do you mean they have all the brands I adore?
They have Nintendo, Nespresso, Apple, and more.
What about...
So the Who answered questions from friends till they were blue. Each one listened and shouted, from Walmart? Who knew? Shop gifts from top brands for everyone on your list in the Walmart app.
This episode is presented by State Farm. Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm. It's like needing the protection of an offensive guard on the football field, but getting an elementary school crossing guard. Sure, they're both guards, but you can only trust one to keep your quarterback safe when the game is on the line. So don't settle for just any insurance when there's State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
All right, we are back, and we turn our attention very quickly to the gridiron. We want to talk about the Duke UVA game that happened on Saturday. Duke, unfortunately, loses 34-17 in a game that didn't feel like it was that close until they started to creep back towards the end. Jason, they dropped to 5-5, 4-2 in the ACC, and I'm not going to say they are officially eliminated because they actually aren't, but they are all but out of the ACC championship race. There's really no way for them to make up any ground unless everyone else implodes in front of them, we're running out of time for that. But Jason, talk to me about this game, because when I will freely admit I did not get a chance to watch it. I was following it while I was doing my jaunt across Philadelphia. But one thing that stood out to me is that Duke had only 42 yards rushing and UVA had 224 yards rushing. And when you combine those plus UVA just really going off the meat rack when it comes to passing, it felt like Duke couldn't stop them.
Yeah, that would be accurate. Yeah, UVA put up close to 550 yards of total offense. And
hard to win those games.
Yeah, we talked on the preview coming into this game about the fact that Duke is really banged up on defense. Our defense has really struggled lately. And, we'd have to win a shootout. And UVA is a good defensive team. It was a shootout, but Duke was not up to the task of being the other end of that shootout. The crazy thing about it was Duke would be really good on first and second down against Virginia. Like, we'd have them in third and long, we'd have them in difficult spots, and they would just rip off 15, 20-yard plays left and right. The chunk plays just kept on happening. And that'll get you down, we made a nice play. We stopped them on first down, held them to very little yards. And, we defended the pass on second down. And then suddenly they're ripping off these 15-plus yard plays. It happened again and again and again. And I think it's just tough to keep up with that kind of thing. Like not Kansas. I've got basketball in the brain. Virginia's opening drive. I want to say it was 14 plays, 7+ minutes. It just went on and on and on. And it included, by the way, a fourth down conversion that looked like maybe Duke had stopped them, and the referees didn't bother to review it. I think, I kind of hate it when the refs give them a favorable call, they rush to the line and get off a play before you can review it. Although I didn't see an angle that said that the review on that play was definitively wrong. It looked kind of like when the referee went and spotted the ball, you were like, wait, why is he spotting it 2 yards ahead of where the dude got tackled? I'm a little confused here. But I think the story of the game, as much as it was Virginia just getting those big chunk plays, it was Duke's inability to get much of anything on offense. Duke went 3 and out on their first three. I think it was the first 3 possessions. Donald, I'm going to be very honest. Usually I do a lot of research. I got all my notes and stuff. Mm-hmm. Not for this game.
It's a difficult watch. It's a difficult watch, and for me, difficult to follow. Because I mean, I'm following the text messages and stuff like that, and everyone's kind of saying this game is just a sluggish game for Duke. And again, when you have everyone talking about how the ACC could have been shut out if Duke had won the ACC championship, had been shut out of the playoff, I'm like, okay, cool. Let's test that theory. But it didn't feel like the team was able to do that. And like you said, if you're keeping your defense, which is already decimated on the field for 7-8 minutes at a time, and then 3 plays later, they're having to come back onto the field, like I'm sure they were gassed before halftime.
And a defense that doesn't have a lot of depth. But again, the Virginia defense, huge hat tip to them. Darian Mentz is a guy who's been completing close to 70% of his passes all year. He's just 18 of 35 in this game. That's right at 50%. And Duke we couldn't get. You mentioned the rushing game, 42 total yards rushing. We just couldn't get anything going on offense, and it felt like Virginia did a great job of covering our wide receivers, of preventing us from finding anybody who was open. A lot of the pass plays that Darryn Peterson completed were check downs and things like that. It felt like every time he threw the ball more than 10 yards or so downfield, it was just super tough for Duke to get the completion. I mean, Cooper Barkate only has 3 receptions in this game. There hasn't been a team to really shut him down the way Virginia did all year long. And on this day, I don't know that this is the case all season long, but on this day, Virginia was clearly the better. Duke has had some losses where you're like, that game against Illinois, it was turnovers and stuff, but we were right in there. Game against Tulane, we were right in there. This game is not a game like that. Duke was not in there with Virginia. It was, in fact, coming into halftime at one point, it was 7-3, kind of late in the second quarter, and I was like, if we can somehow get into halftime at 7-3, or even when it was 14, you're like even 14-3, just like, wow, that'd be great because we've been thoroughly outplayed. And you're like, maybe in the second half things will work out better, and then. And then no, it did not happen for us in the second half. There's just not much to like about this game other than Todd Polino. They said he hit a 49-yarder. That looked like 50 to me, Donald. I think Todd Polino pulled off a 50-yard field goal. So, good for him, but there's just not much else that went well for Duke this game.
And now we're in a race against time, right? Because we have 2 games left. We're at UNC next weekend. We then finish the season at home against Wake Forest. We're 5-5. We need to get that 6th win so that we can become bowl eligible, which is unfathomable to think that a team that 2 weeks ago was the Vegas odds-on favorite to win the ACC championship may not qualify for a bowl game if they don't win one of their next 2 games. And so it's hard, right? Because one, you're going to Chapel Hill. That is going to be a mess in itself. And you don't want to be a team that loses to UNC, but it's obviously something that can happen with a defense that's as decimated as Duke's has been with injuries this season. But this is the point where we need to get together. It's 2 rivalry games. It's our 2 biggest rivals on the football field, I should say, at least. Yeah. And we want to win those 2 games. So hopefully the motivation this week is, okay, let's ruin their seasons. Let's get them down into the bowl tiers that they may not want, because those teams are viewed as a little bit higher, at least in stature as a football program. Let's knock them down a little bit. And at the process, let's get to 6-5, 7-5, and let's get to a bowl game and let's win that bowl game. And then we can kind of look back and see where we went wrong this year. But I think these 2 games, they really need to hone in and focus, because again, at 5-5, you do not want to enter that last week against Wake Forest needing a win to become bowl eligible. You want to get that out of the way, but it's a rivalry game, so we got to lock in.
Yeah. And it's worth noting that Carolina, who's had more than their share of struggles on this season, is also trying to find bowl eligibility. They're currently 4-6. They've got Duke and then a game at NC State. So the Carolina finished their season with Wake, Duke, and NC State. I mean, that is rivalry central for them. But the Tar Heels have 4 wins in the season. And if they beat Duke and NC State, they will also get to bowl eligibility. And Bill Belichick wants to Bill Belichick's just so looking forward to going to, Birmingham for the Gasparilla Bowl or whatever else it may be.
Look,
so
Tampa for Gasparilla, Birmingham Bowl, great. Try the barbecue, Jim and Nick's. Shout out to Jim and Nick's. But no, I think, again, this is another motivation, right? Like, I know a lot of teams don't like to play let's send them home, right? But we can do that on Saturday. We'll obviously talk about that a little bit later down the week, but this is a game where we need to lock in. It is UNC. We don't need to be motivated for this. And if you do, you're in the wrong rivalry. That's how we're going to do it. That's how we end it on this here DBR Bites. We will be back later this week after the Kansas game. The Kansas game's late, so it probably won't be immediately afterwards, but who knows? Let's see what happens in the game. Get your headlines in, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. For Jason, I'm Donald. Now it's time for the Duke Band to play us out, take us to the Garden.